Hey, and welcome back to Doc Talk, sponsored by Anima Mundi PLLC. I am Dr. A,
And I'm Dr. Vanburg.
and today we're going to be talking about stress, trauma, and your body. So, what happens when you are under stress? What happens when a traumatic event happens or takes place? And what does that do to your system? What might that look like? Right? So I think when we jump right into this, we really talk about, okay, let's say something happens, right? You're in a car accident, right? That can be traumatic. You're in a car accident, something happens. What is happening for you physiologically, right?
Right. Your very, very brilliant body is going to do the very thing that it is designed for, which is going to initiate a sequence of events that are designed for your survival, right? So this is controlled largely by the autonomic nervous system that's got two branches.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about these two branches, we're looking specifically at your sympathetic nervous system, right? And we're looking at your parasympathetic nervous system. And they're supposed to work in order to kind of like checks and balances, right? They counteract one another.
Gas and brakes.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that our sympathetic nervous system is definitely the gas.
Yes, it spins you up, right? Gets you ready for whatever that threat coming your way is. What are some of the indicators that that system has kicked on?
So things like you might notice that your breathing has changed, right?
Mm-hmm. In what way? What will happen?
So you might notice that you start to have a more shallow breath, right? Because your body is actually working like a well-oiled machine, right? Your blood is pooling differently. Blood is getting sent to major organs. Oxygen is being redirected. Because what's really happening is you've kicked on that fight or flight.
That's
so
right.
The body is gearing up to either stay, right, and fight and defend itself, or it's getting ready to run. Let me get out of this dangerous situation that maybe I'm not able to undertake at this time.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So other things that might kick on when we're thinking about the sympathetic nervous system, right?
Digestion issues.
Absolutely.
So the system is brilliant, and what it recognizes is there's only so much energy. I can only do so many things at once. It's going to start flipping off things that are non-essential in that moment for survival. If I'm going to die in the next 10 minutes, it does not matter whether or not I've digested the sandwich. So we're going to see all kinds of really strange deviations from our normal digestive operations when this is on. So I might not eat, I might not feel hungry, or I may eat because I know that I should, and it tends to make me feel a little ill. You might notice that a lot.
Pupil dilation, we might become really focused, right, on certain things because, again, we are starting to kind of push out any distracting information that might keep me from being able to be safe.
Right. We may notice a difference in our heart rate. We probably actually will. And sometimes that can be a little distressing. It can get going quite fast. That's a normative part of this process, right? Where that blood is doing a lot of extra things now. So we're going to notice a change in heart rate.
And we're going back to this place where the body is doing everything it can to survive, right? Because it's recognizing that you're gearing up, right? So this could be for a firefight, right? Maybe if you are in battle and you're in military, or this could be if a burglar is breaking into your house, right? You might notice that these things start to kick in if you realize that somebody is, breaking into your home.
Right. And these reactions are scalable. So on the one end, we have these really major events. Sometimes it's I'm running late. Right?
Absolutely.
And I can have a little bit of this kick on and I notice, my mouth is dry. I'm noticing that I'm, breathing a little bit more shallow, a little bit more tight than I was a moment ago. Same.
How many times has this happened, right? You're in a hurry, you're driving, you get to your destination, you get out of your vehicle, you grab your stuff, you kind of run into your office, you get to your office, you sit down in your chair and you're like, right?
Yeah.
And then you realize the heart rate and you're out of breath and all of these other things that come with it.
Right. Now, in a well-regulated system, what will happen next?
So then after you take that nice deep sigh of relief, right? After a little bit of time, what we're noticing at this point is then we kick on that parasympathetic nervous system, which is that, phew, I've made it, relax.
Pump the brakes.
Calm. Exactly.
Yes.
We're hitting the brakes. Thank you, body, for responding. I no longer need your services in that area. Parasympathetic system, stand down.
Right.
Or I'm sorry, sympathetic nervous system, stand down. Parasympathetic nervous system is going to start to take over.
That's right. I love that you named this sighing. It's one of the things that will happen. Breath is the regulatory process for most of the body. So when we're done with that spun up, got to get the job done or the threat handled, we're going to notice one of the first things is it's that
Mm-hmm.
deep belly breath where the breath is returning back to its more normal, natural rhythm.
And let's talk about that a little bit more, that deep belly breath.
Mm-hmm.
What is the breath's function or utility when we're thinking about parasympathetic nervous system? Why do we teach this so much? Why do we talk about this in therapy so much?
Yeah, it's a way using breath because it is so regulatory to the rest of the system's arousal. When we do things with our breath with intention and in specific ways, it's our way of kind of manually hitting that brake. We're kind of pulling that e-brake a little bit to give the system the signal, all clear. And we do that by breathing in a way that infers there is no danger present.
Absolutely. And so oftentimes I think when we work with people, we will talk about kind of either breathing in, holding, and then exhaling longer than your breath in
Mm-hmm.
is. This helps to activate, right, our parasympathetic nervous system. Or you might also hear it called your relaxation response,
Mm-hmm. That's right.
right? When else might we use this relaxation response? Can you think of activities that come into play that maybe people can link that to or get a better understanding?
Yeah, I think there are some standards, and then I think there are some things that work on an individual basis. So one of the big ones are meditation, things that give you a moment's pause, literally, right, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of be in the body, feel your breath. The heart rate's going to return back to normal. That's one of the really critical, easy to do, free ones. You can do it anywhere at any time.
Love
That
it.
one's helpful.
Right. So right along the lines of that mindful breathing,
Mm-hmm.
noticing your breath, noticing where you feel it the most, whether that's the chest space, the belly, whatever that is for you. Everybody's got a different anchor. And then focusing in on that, calming the breath,
Mm-hmm.
breathing in deeply, exhaling out completely. Other things that you might be able to pair this to, or you might have noticed, right, specifically for you, could be things like engaging in yoga. This happens when we are doing yoga. This happens when we're doing Tai Chi, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are other activities that you might notice that you begin to do this. And if you think back to times that maybe you've engaged in these activities, it'll make sense. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I did feel really calm. I was really focused either on my breath or my body. And I kind of got that, sometimes coined the yoga drunk, right? That sense of like, hi, that is your parasympathetic system or your relaxation response kicking in
Mm-hmm.
full gear. Thank you, relaxation response.
Yeah. We may notice also when the parasympathetic starts to do its thing, we might get hungry again. We may
Mm-hmm.
notice some of these things rebounding because the system's like, okay, all clear, back to normative processing again.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the other things that we might see? So, we know that this can impact salivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that it can impact kind of digestion, right? What other things can we think of when we're talking about parasympathetic nervous system? What might people notice?
When it's on,
Mm-hmm.
so a lack of muscle tension, perhaps. So the body is no longer physically prepared for some kind of fight or flight situation. So we may notice that our shoulders are going to drop. It's going to be easier to breathe. The system, we're not so tight, so it's easier to do that diaphragmatic breathing.
Absolutely. And so if the muscles are relaxing and we're starting to get that GI system back up and running the way that it needs to, we might also notice we have to go to the bathroom.
Yep.
Right? So you might end up having to go afterwards, right? That's also pretty normative.
Right. We might also notice that there's a difference in what we can literally see or what we can pay attention to. So when we are in that really heightened state, it's difficult to have connection. It's difficult to take in all the information. So when parasympathetic is doing its job and doing it well, we may notice that like, oh, hi friend, I can see and talk to you again. I can engage with what's happening in the environment. With
As opposed to
greater
the other,
ease. Right.
where you're like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah. It's like I can only see this potential thing. Usually it's the threat that we're focused on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why might it be really critical for people to know about the sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system? What does this mean for people?
I think the two things that come to my mind is knowledge is always power, right? If we don't know that this process is normative essential actually, we might start to ascribe all kinds of meanings when it begins to happen. We might call a normative escalation in our arousal by the sympathetic nervous system as anxiety, when really, no, that's a normative stress response. It's supposed to do that. So it gives us that way of kind of understanding what should I be expecting versus what might be actually problematic.
So one of the things that I really want to highlight with this is that our sympathetic nervous system is like this. It happens so quick, right? We don't even realize it. The difference being that our parasympathetic nervous system takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come into play as quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I know, bummer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is why doing some of these other things that we were talking about, like the mindful breathing or that really diaphragmatic breathing, can help you kind of kick it into gear, right? Additionally, what we find is that with some people, they can stay stuck
Mm-hmm.
in some of these functions, right? So specifically, they can get stuck in that space of that sympathetic nervous system, or I like to call it the body's first responders, staying on duty all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we see this the most?
Where do we see it?
Mm-hmm.
Like in our bodies or in life?
When we're working with people, when people come into you.
Yeah, so I'm a trauma specialist. I see this usually folks coming in saying, I've had these particular events happen. And since that time, I'm noticing that I don't tend to relax, maybe ever. We notice all of those things that we named earlier in this episode on and running full throttle, maybe all the time with very few exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if I'm totally alone in a quiet house, maybe that feels better, or maybe it makes it feel worse. Yeah. But we notice that it's on more often than it should be, and we really have a strong difficulty in kind of getting into that other zone. So that's where I would see it the most.
Absolutely. I think that that's where I tend to see it a lot too, when people come in and they are reporting trauma events or even a series of trauma events, right? So this could be one thing happened and you're still struggling with it a couple of months later, or this could be kind of a little bit more on the chronic side. Something happened in childhood, something happened in adolescence, something happened later on in adulthood, right? And so sometimes we see, just a variety of things, which also makes it difficult for people to gauge. Like, okay, when's the last time that you felt that relaxation response kick in, right? And they're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's possible that you've never had that experience, depending on what that backstory looks like for you.
Yeah, you're not able to remember or recall. And so I think it's important to also note that we can get stuck on this on phase, or we can get stuck in the off phase, and or they can actually be cyclical and they can rotate, right?
Absolutely.
So we see this a lot too when we're thinking about regulation. And so this would be more of that dysregulation, right?
Absolutely.
It's harder for us to hit that homeostasis or that sense of balance, which then is really critical, because this is when we see people often being anxious, what they would term anxious. They're always on guard or on edge, or potentially kind of keyed up, waiting for the other shoe to drop, is the way that I've heard it described a lot.
So sometimes there can be particular events or circumstances that are triggering that arousal, and other times, especially when it's more chronic, we might find that it actually has a biochemical underpinning. So maybe it's not a particular thing that is happening, but the system's just on because we're having some kind of dysregulation with neurotransmitters. And what's interesting about this is it can be very cyclical, because we just discussed the incredible impact our arousal level has on our gut. Our gut is also the place where many of our really, really critical biochemicals are made.
Tell me more.
So things that happen there are the building blocks for basically everything else that happens in your body. So if maybe I'm always in sympathetic response, right? And I'm not digesting very well. Where am I getting those critical elements for the building blocks for serotonin, dopamine? If I don't have those going on, I also typically don't have melatonin, which is how I sleep, right? So we begin to see how if we have a prolonged stress response, it can actually lead to a prolonged stress response without there being a new stressor in the environment.
And if we're having difficulty with the production of these neurochemicals, right, then we might also be seeing difficulty with cognition, so thinking, problem solving, and with our mood.
Right.
It is all tied in together.
Always.
Right? So if we knock one of these building blocks out of place, we are definitely going to see an effect, or a domino effect, right? We're going to see all kinds of other things impacted. So this is why people will oftentimes come in and say, I'm having difficulty with sleep. As you talk to them a little bit more, as we talk to them a little bit more, we might find that they are reporting difficulty with either going to the bathroom. This might be going to the bathroom. This might be feelings of constipation, stomach pains. I've heard it reported as jabbing sensations, bloating, all kinds of things. It really is connected, and people don't realize that these two things interact, right? And that they actually are in balance as well.
They absolutely are. We have one unit. we can't really effectively separate it because they're meant to operate as one thing.
So they work in tandem.
They do.
Right? So I think that gets us back to kind of the idea of this mind-body connection, right? So you can't have one without the other. Well, I think that we have definitely talked a lot about this. So thank you all for joining us today. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.
If you have any interest in engaging us for therapeutic services or consultation services, or you just want to learn more about what we do at Emma Mundi, please do check the link in the description box below. Thanks, guys.